Snow moved like ghosts across the frozen prairie, winter rain turning every fence post silver and brittle. The wind had no mercy, shaping drifts like pale dunes around the lonely wagon as it crawled along a narrow trail. Evelyn Harper sat in the back wrapped in a thin blue shawl, her breath shivering into fog. She watched the endless fields with a sadness heavier than her years. 26 years of learning how to stay quiet, how to do everything right, and still feel as though she never quite belonged. Caleb Turner held the reins with a distant expression, glancing at her only when she shifted her weight. His silence felt colder than the wind. Evelyn wanted to ask where they were going, but Caleb disliked questions unless they confirmed his authority. She tried to appear calm, though her heartbeat kept fluttering like a frightened bird behind her ribs. The wagon wheels sank into slushy snow, and the cold settled through her shawl. She remembered autumn mornings when she still believed marriage might soften loneliness, or at least offer someone to speak to during supper. Caleb liked a wife who worked, not a wife who dreamed. When the wagon finally stopped near an abandoned streambed, Evelyn recognized nothing. The land felt forsaken, no cabins or trails, only pale cottonwoods leaning like tall mourners. She asked softly if the horses needed rest. Caleb's answer came like a stone thrown into still water. He said they were done traveling together. She blinked slowly, uncertain she heard correctly. Her hands trembled against the wooden rail, and she searched Caleb's face for any sign of misunderstanding. Caleb dismounted and tossed a small bundle onto the ground. A thin blanket, a tin cup, and a scrap of bread wrapped in cloth. He handed her a folded note without emotion. She unfolded it with numb fingers and read 4 words scrawled in hurried ink. No one's wife. The breath left her body, like a candle blown out in a chapel. Evelyn lifted her eyes toward Caleb, not pleading, only stunned by the cruelty of simplification, as if a human heart could be dismissed through careless handwriting. Caleb muttered that returning to town alone would teach her humility. Evelyn stood frozen, not from weather but from disbelief. She wondered if she had mistaken decency for love, or if she had merely become inconvenient to a man who desired admiration more than partnership. Caleb swung back into the wagon and urged the horses onward. The wheels splashed through mud, shrinking into distance until the sound disappeared entirely. Evelyn remained where he left her, the blanket clutched in both hands. Snowflakes kissed her eyelashes and melted into tears. Her legs already felt weak from cold. She lowered herself beneath a cottonwood tree, pressing the blanket around her shoulders. The world blurred through steady snowfall, trees dissolving into silhouettes as though night swallowed the horizon. She whispered that survival required calmness, though panic clawed at her chest. She thought of the home she kept spotless, of mornings when she arranged flowers even though Caleb never noticed them. She wondered if perhaps she had spent her life caring for men who rarely cared back. The cold seeped deeper. Her teeth rattled. She pressed her palm against a rough tree trunk, grounding herself against its strength, imagining roots beneath frozen soil that refused to surrender to winter. She told herself she would not die here. Even abandoned souls deserved a chance. She remembered memories of warmth, fresh bread, lamplight, summer bees drifting across tall grass. Night approached early, bringing a sky sealed with thick clouds. Evelyn prayed someone might pass, though roads stayed empty this time of year. She felt herself drifting toward sleep, the kind that arrives like surrender. She feared it more than loneliness. She forced herself to stand and take a few steps, hoping movement would ignite heat, but dizziness spun the world into uncertain shapes. She knelt slowly, afraid she might collapse entirely if she rose too quickly. A distant sound echoed through the storm. Heavy footsteps breaking crusted snow. Not a horse, not a wagon, only a single rhythm, deliberate and powerful. Evelyn lifted her head, breath caught between fear and impossible hope. The footsteps grew closer, steady as a drumbeat. A dark figure emerged between cottonwoods, enormous shoulders draped with long hair soaked by winter rain, chest bared despite the freezing wind. The man knelt beside her without urgency, wrapping strong arms around her, as if she were lighter than snow. His warmth startled her, radiating like a hidden hearth. She sensed no threat, only fierce stillness. Her vision flickered at the edges. She saw his face through a curtain of falling snow. Stern features softened by concern, eyes dark and unafraid. He lifted her against his body and whispered she would not die in this storm, promising her survival with a steadiness she had never known. The storm hissed against the cottonwoods, yet inside his arms she felt a shelter larger than walls or fire. Everything she believed about strength shifted as she drifted toward unconsciousness, realizing that sometimes salvation wears no uniform, speaks no promise, and arrives without reason. She surrendered to that mystery, unaware her life had just changed. Firelight shimmered across the curved walls of the winter lodge when Evelyn slowly returned to consciousness. Heat wrapped around her like a thick quilt, and the scent of cedar smoke floated through the air with a calming weight. Her body lay on a pile of soft woven blankets, limbs stiff yet no longer trembling. For a long moment she listened without moving, unsure whether she had dreamed her abandonment or still lived inside its sharp edges. Outside, she heard distant winds lifting snow into restless spirals, but inside the lodge the world felt gentler, protected from the violence of winter. She shifted her head slightly, and caught sight of the man who had found her. He sat cross-legged near the fire, shirtless despite the cold, drying his long dark hair with a strip of deerskin. His shoulders were broad and patient, as though carved from the same roots as the cottonwoods. His presence filled the lodge with steady quiet, neither threatening nor curious, simply aware. Evelyn remembered the strength of his arms carrying her through the storm, how he shielded her from freezing rain with little more than his own body. When the man realized she was awake, he lifted his gaze, meeting her eyes with a calm that felt strangely intimate. He asked gently how she felt, though his voice carried more care than question. Evelyn whispered that she felt numb but safe. He nodded once, and offered a bowl of warm broth seasoned with herbs she could not name. As she sipped, her throat felt as if thawing from an icy silence. She thanked him with a hoarse murmur. He introduced himself as Tala Red Eagle, a hunter and protector within the nearby Apache settlement. His tone held neither pride nor apology, simply truth spoken without performance. Evelyn's mind wandered to the note pinned to her coat, that cruel sentence Caleb left behind, as though her existence weighed less than a broken wagon wheel. She wondered whether Tala had read it. Before she asked, Tala reached beside the fire and lifted the folded scrap of paper. He studied it again, his jaw tightening with restrained emotion. He said no woman deserved to be named as belonging nowhere. Winter could freeze rivers and silence wildlife, yet still it had more mercy than the man who abandoned her. Tears slipped down Evelyn's cheeks without warning, not because she remembered Caleb with longing, but because she finally felt seen by someone who had no reason to understand her pain. Tala did not speak again, allowing her sorrow to settle without judgment. He added more wood to the fire, and handed her a small clay cup to warm her fingers. The gift felt as important as shelter itself. Over the next hours she slept again and woke in short intervals, drifting between memory and present comfort. Each time she opened her eyes, Tala remained nearby. Sometimes he prepared medicines crushed from forest roots. Sometimes he repaired arrows with deliberate precision. Sometimes he simply listened to the crackle of the fire. Evelyn admired the unhurried way he moved, as if the world taught him patience long before language did. Little by little her strength returned. Tala encouraged her to drink water steeped with mint and willow bark, saying it would calm her nerves and ease the frost inside her lungs. Evelyn trusted him instinctively, though she did not know why trust came so easily after so much betrayal. Maybe his silence protected her more than explanations. Maybe the lodge itself, with its thick hide walls and smoky aroma, reminded her that kindness could exist outside familiar places. Shortly after noon, a small boy slipped through the doorway carrying a basket of braided bread. His cheeks were rosy, eyes bright with curiosity. Tala introduced him as Little Crow, a playful soul from the settlement. The boy smiled shyly and placed the basket near Evelyn's blankets before darting toward Tala with childlike excitement. Evelyn whispered her thanks, though Little Crow seemed more fascinated by her pale skin and soft hair than by her words. Tala chuckled quietly, and Evelyn felt a spark of comfort knowing laughter could live even inside winter. That evening, several women from the village visited the lodge. They brought warm blankets stitched with colorful geometric patterns, along with dried berries and a jar of honey. Evelyn feared she would be seen as an intruder, but instead the women greeted her like a neighbor who needed rest. They treated her suffering not as scandal, but as injury deserving compassion. Their absence of judgment felt like sunlight after weeks of overcast skies. Evelyn bowed her head in gratitude, overwhelmed by the simplicity of acceptance. When the women left, Tala offered her a thicker blanket lined with fur. Evelyn studied the stitching and marveled at the detail of every thread. She had spent months in a ranch house where comfort was counted in chores completed and silence endured. Yet one day among strangers had given her more kindness than all her married years combined. Tala noticed her distant expression, and asked if the blanket felt too heavy. She shook her head and said it felt like belonging. He looked at her with a softness that resembled reverence. Later, while Evelyn rested, Tala returned to sharpening his arrows, but she sensed a different energy in the lodge. The air felt charged with unspoken grief, as though Tala had absorbed the cruelty of the note more deeply than words could reveal. She spoke softly, telling him Caleb believed abandoning her would restore his pride. Tala answered that pride without honor turned men into shadows. He said a man becomes smaller when he sees a woman as property rather than partner. His simple tone made the truth sound ancient and unnegotiable. Evelyn felt something warm bloom inside her chest, not desire but recognition. She realized she had never heard a man defend her worth without expecting devotion in return. For the first time in her life, she felt safe enough to breathe without apology. A steady calm spread through her limbs, replacing the frantic despair that once consumed her. On the third morning, snow softened into delicate flakes, and sunlight spilled through the smoke hole above the fire. Evelyn asked Tala how long she had slept. He said 3 days had passed since he found her, and winter would remain harsh for many weeks. She thanked him again for saving her. Tala said gently he did not save her. Nature kept her alive until she could be carried, and she chose to keep breathing. His humility surprised her. She whispered that most men would have demanded gratitude. Tala simply smiled and handed her a steaming bowl of porridge. Outside the lodge, she heard distant laughter and the rustling of children playing near icy branches. Tala said the settlement respected peace, even when the world outside judged them. Evelyn listened to the soothing rhythm of voices and wondered how many stories lived inside these walls, how many hearts learned dignity before blame. That night, Evelyn lay near the fire, watching snow dance through the smoke hole, and she whispered into the silence that perhaps abandonment was not the end of her story. Tala paused his work, glancing at her with quiet concern, and told her storms sometimes carry people toward destinations they never imagined. She closed her eyes, letting his words settle like warm embers. Yet before sleep claimed her, she sensed something unspoken in Tala's gaze, a question or memory he would not yet reveal, as though the winter had delivered not just shelter, but a destiny neither of them fully understood. Winter stretched on with the patience of an old storyteller, snow deepening around the Apache settlement until every path disappeared under white silence. Evelyn moved with growing ease inside the community, carrying water, folding blankets, and teaching little Crow how to shape letters in the ashes by the fire. Tala noticed her confidence strengthening, though he offered help only when she asked, never assuming she could not manage. Every hour with him reminded her that gentleness could exist inside the strongest of spirits. One afternoon, the sound of hooves broke the calm rhythm of village life. A pale cloud of snow rose beyond the tree line as a rider approached, wrapped in a heavy coat trimmed with sheepskin. Evelyn instinctively stepped back from the lodge doorway, pulse quivering with memories of Caleb's sudden cruelty. Tala stood beside her, expression steady, though his eyes sharpened with alertness. The rider slowed as he entered the settlement clearing. Evelyn recognized Sheriff Dalton Price, a fair man with a cautious way of speaking. He swung down from his horse and removed his hat, nodding respectfully at Tala before glancing toward Evelyn with concern. He said the town had been searching for her for several days. Rumors spread that she had vanished or been taken without consent. The storm made it impossible to travel safely until now. Evelyn steadied herself, fingers tightening around the blanket draped across her shoulders. She asked whether Caleb had told anyone the truth. The sheriff hesitated, confessing that Caleb claimed Evelyn had abandoned her marriage and wandered into the wilderness without reason. Caleb insisted Evelyn belonged nowhere, and the Apache had provided improper refuge. Evelyn felt an old ache reopen, not because she desired Caleb's approval, but because she finally understood the depth of his arrogance. Even abandonment came wrapped in lies. Tala stepped closer, voice quiet yet immovable. He told the sheriff that Evelyn had been left in the storm, with only a note for explanation. Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from relief that Tala spoke without hesitation. Sheriff Price studied Tala's face with respectful uncertainty. He said he believed Evelyn, yet the law rarely punished a man for leaving his wife unless violence could be proved. The sheriff added that Caleb had already stirred suspicion in town, convincing several farmers that the Apache held Evelyn against her will. Evelyn lifted her chin, voice firm though soft. She told the sheriff she stayed because she was safe here, and nowhere else had offered her dignity since the moment Caleb treated her as disposable. She did not want to return. Sheriff Price shifted uneasily, aware that town opinions were easily poisoned by fear. He warned them that Caleb might attempt to confront the settlement with hired men, claiming rights over a wife he had discarded. Tala listened with a stillness that resembled heavy stone under snow. After the sheriff left, Evelyn's composure wavered. She sat near the fire and wrapped her hands around a warm cup of tea, trying to calm the quickening in her chest. She had known Caleb valued reputation more than remorse, but she had not expected him to twist abandonment into false victimhood. Tala sat beside her, not touching, yet offering presence. His silence allowed her thoughts to unfurl like a winter bloom. Villagers sensed tension rippling through the settlement. Little Crow stopped his playful lessons and began lingering closer to Tala, mimicking his vigilant posture. The women whispered that white men often misread strength as threat, especially when pride was wounded. Evelyn wished she could make the town understand that Tala had given her life, not stolen her freedom. A soft knock came at dusk. Mrs. Lucinda Myers entered with a small tin lantern, eyes warm with sympathy. She had heard Evelyn's disappearance blamed on the Apache, and rode through the storm to learn the truth herself. Evelyn shared everything as calmly as she could: the abandonment, the note, Tala's rescue, the quiet security she now felt. Mrs. Myers listened with gentle fury, muttering that Caleb always needed admiration, like a starving dog needed scraps. She said she had known such men before, men who treated loyalty as possession and kindness as weakness. Mrs. Myers stayed until late evening, sharing biscuits and stories of women she had known who found courage only after the world pushed them to its edge. Evelyn absorbed every word like nourishment. She realized her grief had once been shaped by silence, but here she learned that sharing her story transformed despair into strength. Tala watched them with reverence, as though witnessing a language made only from honesty. When Mrs. Myers finally departed, she pressed Evelyn's hands and whispered that she would defend her reputation in town, even if no one wished to listen. Evelyn blinked back tears. She felt a shift inside herself, a rising awareness that she was no longer trapped by Caleb's judgment. She was part of a community that measured worth through compassion instead of control. Days passed, and snow thickened around the settlement, but a new fear took root. Evelyn occasionally heard distant voices beyond the ridge, rough laughter and clinking metal. Tala returned one evening with a troubled expression. He said Caleb had ridden near the river with 2 ranch hands, scouting the settlement boundary, though making no attempt to enter. Evelyn trembled at the idea that Caleb would rather invent outrage than accept responsibility. She asked Tala whether he feared conflict. Tala shook his head, saying conflict was not frightening when the heart stayed anchored in truth. He added that he would never harm Caleb unless necessary, but he would not let fear dictate Evelyn's safety. His certainty soothed her more than any vow could. She understood now that strength did not roar, it simply remained. That night, Evelyn lay awake listening to the soft thrum of wind against hide walls. She thought of Caleb's pride wounded by her refusal to return, and how easily men could justify cruelty when they wrapped it in righteousness. She wondered what stories town gossip would spin by morning. Perhaps they would claim she had been seduced or brainwashed, or maybe they would say she enjoyed wilderness more than responsibility. Few would believe abandonment without proof, especially when Caleb stood untouched by consequence. Evelyn pressed a hand to her heart and inhaled deeply. She had escaped death, but she had not escaped judgment. Tala slept on the far side of the fire, and she watched him through the faint glow of embers. His breathing was slow and grounded, as if storms could not disturb him. She admired his patience, then realized that patience itself might be his greatest shield. Outside the lodge, the snow seemed to hush the world into secrecy. Evelyn felt a sharp understanding arrive without warning. Caleb would not surrender easily. His pride had been bruised by the mere idea that she had found peace without him. She closed her eyes and whispered that whatever storm approached would test not only her endurance, but the quiet sanctuary she had found beside Tala. And somewhere beyond the dark trees, the crunch of distant footsteps confirmed that winter carried more than wind toward their door. Snowfall softened into quiet beauty as late winter settled over the valley, transforming the settlement into a landscape where every tree felt dipped in white silk. Evelyn stepped outside each morning with a sense of gratitude she had never known before, letting icy air kiss her cheeks while the fire inside the lodge still warmed her bones. Tala often joined her, carrying bundles of kindling or inspecting traps near the frozen creek. They spoke without urgency, letting conversation drift like steam rising from warm stones. Evelyn felt no expectation around him, only the peaceful rhythm of two people learning how to share silence. Days lengthened with small rituals. She taught little crow words from an English primer, guiding his hand as he traced shapes in the snow. Tala watched with quiet pride, admiring Evelyn's patience, especially when the boy grew restless. Evelyn rarely noticed the tenderness in Tala's gaze, though every villager did. He seemed to draw calmness from her, as if her presence mended something inside him that winter once froze. One afternoon, Tala invited Evelyn to walk through the woods while the world glittered with fresh snow. Sunlight poured through icy branches, scattering silver brilliance across the ground. Evelyn inhaled the crisp scent of pine, letting memories of fear dissolve into the quiet beauty around her. Tala taught her how to read animal tracks, how a rabbit pressed lightly into powder, how a fox left delicate imprints with narrow claws. Evelyn felt the woods speak a language she had never heard before, patient and honest, without judgment or demand. Tala paused near a fallen tree, and knelt beside a patch of disturbed snow. He brushed frost aside, and revealed a tiny feather half buried in white. Evelyn leaned closer, marveling at the fragile curve. Tala explained that small birds often took refuge beneath leaning logs, where heat from the earth lingered even in winter. Evelyn touched the feather gently, feeling a kinship with the creature that had survived by finding shelter exactly where wilderness offered it. She whispered that she understood the instinct to hide until warmth returned. Tala looked at her with a tenderness that wrapped around her heart like a quilt. They continued walking until the creek appeared ahead, frozen and glassy beneath 1,000 snowflakes. Tala pointed to a line of faint prints crossing the ice, naming them as deer tracks. Evelyn breathed deeply, absorbing every detail of his patient instruction. He guided her hand across the prints, as though teaching her a poem written by winter itself. She felt oddly cherished, not because she needed help, but because Tala offered presence without claiming ownership. Later that evening, inside the lodge, Evelyn tried teaching Tala how to write her name. She dipped a sharpened stick into melted charcoal and traced letters across a piece of hide. Tala studied each line with intense concentration, copying her strokes one by one. His letters wobbled slightly, yet Evelyn found them beautiful, shaped by sincerity more than perfection. Little Crow clapped with delight, dancing around them as if witnessing magic. Every moment seemed filled with gentle discovery. Evelyn learned how to braid dried grasses into small baskets, how to season broth using juniper berries, how to predict storms by watching the motion of distant clouds. Tala listened to her stories about growing up near a quiet river, about reading by candlelight, about long evenings when she imagined life beyond dust and judgment. He never mocked her dreams or tried to mold them into smaller shapes. One night, a soft snowfall drifted past the smoke hole, and Evelyn sat near the fire spinning thread from rabbit fur. Tala repaired a bowstring, while Little Crow slept beneath a blanket patterned with green diamonds. Evelyn spoke softly about Caleb, not with sorrow but distance, as though she were examining an object no longer sharp enough to wound. She said she never understood how marriage could feel lonelier than being widowed. Tala replied that loneliness inside companionship was the deepest winter a soul could endure. Evelyn studied his profile as firelight caressed his skin. His broad shoulders held gentleness rather than power. She wondered whether his strength came from knowing where he belonged, or from loving the land without needing to own it. Tala's hands moved steadily over the bowstring, as if every repair taught patience. She admired the calm certainty in his breath, then realized she had begun watching him with more than gratitude. She respected him before she recognized affection blooming beneath respect. Outside, the wind whispered along the lodge walls. Evelyn felt warmth spreading through her chest, subtle as candlelight. She rested her hand lightly against Tala's forearm, thanking him for protecting her when fear tried to drown her. He lowered his tools and turned toward her with quiet surprise, not because affection startled him, but because he never assumed affection belonged to him. He told her she needed no gratitude to justify her presence. She answered that gratitude was not duty, but comfort. Their eyes lingered longer than usual. Evelyn felt her heart flutter with a softness she had not expected. She understood now that love did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like thawing earth, gentle and persistent, allowing new life to root where cold once ruled. Tala returned his gaze to the fire, as though steadying himself against emotions he refused to rush. Evelyn appreciated his restraint more than any declaration. Later, as they prepared for sleep, Evelyn whispered that she no longer feared Caleb's judgment. Tala nodded, telling her that winter only frightened hearts that refused truth. Evelyn asked whether he believed she would face conflict again. Tala answered that storms returned when pride refused to surrender, but strength was not measured by retaliation. It was measured by endurance. The fire dimmed into embers, and Evelyn closed her eyes with a sense of fragile peace. She believed she had finally stepped beyond the shadow of abandonment and into a life where she could breathe without apology. Yet before sleep claimed her, a distant echo rolled across the valley, not thunder, but the sharp crack of breaking branches beneath heavy boots. Tala sat up instantly, gaze turning toward the forest as wind carried faint voices along frozen currents. Evelyn recognized the sound not as nature, but intention. Winter still cradled her heart, yet the world beyond the settlement had not forgotten her, and the storm approaching would demand courage she had never before required. Winter returned with a restless temper, shaking the pine branches as if warning the settlement that peace could not remain unchallenged. Evelyn woke before dawn to the sound of horses trudging through icy mud, their hooves echoing with intention rather than travel. Tala stood at the doorway of the lodge, already dressed, eyes narrowed toward the ridge. His stillness felt heavier than fear, as though the land itself awaited consequence. Evelyn stepped beside him, heart tightening. She recognized one of the riders even before he came fully into view. Caleb, bundled in a thick wool coat, sat stiffly upon a roan stallion. Two ranch hands flanked him, their rifles glinting beneath a pale sunrise. Caleb's jaw appeared clenched with determination, pride swaddled in anger. Evelyn had imagined seeing him again would stir sadness, yet all she felt was clarity. The man who once swore to love her had abandoned her like fragile cargo. Now he returned not to repent, but to reclaim something he believed he owned. Villagers emerged from their lodges, children ushered indoors, elders standing near Tala with quiet gravity. Caleb halted near the clearing, voice carrying across the snow with bitter confidence. He declared Evelyn must return at once, claiming she had been taken against her will. Tala stepped forward with calm authority, his breath rising into cold air like steam from a forge. He answered that Evelyn was free to choose her future, and needed no permission to remain. Caleb's face reddened with humiliation. He shouted that a wife belonged with her husband, not in a lawless camp. Evelyn stepped from behind Tala, chin lifted. She told Caleb he had forfeited any claim when he left her to die in a storm, and the note he pinned to her coat proved it. Caleb dismissed her words as dramatization. The ranch hands shifted uncomfortably, but Caleb pushed them closer, insisting authority rested with him alone. Sheriff Dalton arrived behind them, breathless from a hard ride. He signaled Caleb to lower his voice, reminding him that the settlement had offered no violence. Caleb scoffed, demanding the sheriff enforce the sanctity of marriage. Evelyn felt a tremor move through her ribs, but not from dread. She believed the sheriff had seen enough truth to understand. She spoke clearly, explaining that she had begged Caleb for respect, not escape. She reminded him of the note still in her possession, Caleb cursed her memory, calling it exaggeration. Tala reached into the lodge and retrieved the scrap of paper, lifting it with steady fingers. The words looked darker than she remembered. No one's wife. The sheriff studied them with solemn disbelief. He turned toward Caleb, saying this evidence alone undermined every accusation. Caleb protested, voice rising with panic, insisting the settlement manipulated Evelyn for their own advantage. One ranch hand shifted away from him, unwilling to support such claims. Caleb's desperation hardened into threat. He reached for his rifle, warning he would not leave without Evelyn. Tala stepped between them with deliberate grace, posture neither aggressive nor hesitant. He did not reach for a weapon, only held his ground with the weight of a mountain. Caleb aimed the rifle shakily, unaware of how fragile rage became beneath witnesses. Tala moved like wind breaking through trees, grasping the barrel and twisting it downward before Caleb could fire. The motion held no cruelty, only certainty. Caleb stumbled backwards, stunned that sheer presence could disarm him without force. The sheriff seized the rifle and ordered Caleb to stand down. Caleb attempted to lunge again, but Tala caught his forearm, not striking, only immobilizing him with quiet strength. The sheriff finally placed Caleb under arrest for endangerment and abandonment. The ranch hands hesitated, then admitted they believed Evelyn had spoken truth. Caleb sagged under the weight of exposure, pride collapsing like rotted timber. Evelyn felt tears push through a wall she had not known existed. She did not cry for Caleb's downfall, but for the release of a burden she carried too long. Tala stepped beside her as Caleb was led away, eyes filled with a sadness deeper than triumph. He carried no satisfaction, only relief that violence had not been required. Evelyn slipped her hand into his, trusting the steadiness of his silence. As the settlement settled back into calm, Evelyn's body shook from emotional exhaustion. Tala guided her into the lodge, letting her breathe near the slowly growing fire. She whispered that fear had left her bones, replaced by something new and tender. Tala watched her with eyes that glowed softly in the firelight, as though witnessing the moment a wounded creature finally felt safe to stand. Evening deepened, and the world outside grew hushed again. Evelyn sat beside Tala, letting warmth soak into her skin. She confessed that no one had ever shielded her without expecting obedience. Tala said he had learned strength from the land, not from conquest, and that every person deserved safety before devotion. Evelyn's breath trembled, realizing her heart had been slowly reawakening. She touched Tala's hand, not with hesitation, but with understanding. She told him she had found more belonging in his quiet presence than in all the walls she once decorated trying to feel accepted. Tala looked into her eyes with reverence, whispering that he had never known a woman who trusted him without fear. He drew closer, forehead resting against hers, as if sharing the breath of winter and fire together. Evelyn whispered that her life had begun again, not because he rescued her, but because he allowed her to reclaim herself. Tala's voice lowered into a promise that carried no ownership. He said she could remain by his side only if her heart chose it freely. Evelyn felt her pulse steady, answering that she did not seek rescue anymore. She sought partnership, warmth, and a place her spirit could rest. She told him she chose him, not out of gratitude, but love she could admit without trembling. Tala's eyes glistened as he whispered that she belonged nowhere except where she was cherished. Outside, snow began falling again, slow and luminous, as though winter celebrated the quiet union unfolding within the lodge. Evelyn leaned into Tala's embrace, heart steady as a drum, knowing love had found her exactly where she once expected only grief. And in the distant darkness beyond their fire, the last trace of Caleb vanished with the wind, leaving nothing but a horizon where two souls were finally free to begin.